Heart of a Champion, Chapter 16. The afternoon of our first game was typical for April in California, warm and sunny. My mother didn't go to many of my games, but she drove Jimmy and me to the park for that one. When we got out of the car, she called me back. "I'm proud of you," she whispered, and then she gave me a kiss. I was jittery through warm-ups, and I didn't even think about my mother. But when the ump yelled, "Play ball!" and I hustled out to second base, I looked into the stands. There were only about 30 people in the bleachers, so it was easy to catch her eye. She smiled and waved. That's when I spotted Mr. Winter. He was sitting about 2 rows behind my mother, his arm around a young woman who was definitely not Jimmy's mother. I looked over to Jimmy. The bill of his cap was pulled down, his eyes were glued on the batter at home plate. But if I'd seen his father, then Jimmy had seen him too. Like a lot of first games, this one started out weird. Our pitcher, Jeff Cole, walked the first 2 San Carlos Mariners on 8 pitches, then struck out the next guy with 3 fastballs. Down the heart of the plate, their cleanup hitter took 2 mighty swings and came up empty both times. And then on the 0-2 pitch, he checked his swing and dumped a little flare out of my reach into short right. A weak hit, but the run scored. The next batter crushed Cole's first pitch, but he smacked it right at Jimmy. Jimmy gloved it, and his throw doubled the runner off first. I was hitting in the 2 spot, so I ran in, grabbed my bat, and hustled to the on-deck circle. I hadn't felt too nervous in the field, but once I started swinging my bat, I found myself kind of belching and gasping for air. I forgot about my mother, Mr. Winter, his girlfriend, Jimmy. All I was thinking about was myself. Our leadoff hitter, Joey Reichler, grounded out on the second pitch. "Batter up!" the ump yelled, and just like that, I was standing at the plate for my first at-bat in Babe Ruth. Fastball. That's what I was looking for, but that's what I was afraid of, too. Afraid that I wouldn't be able to get around on it. I'd strike out just like I had against Cannon, and a fastball is what I got. Knee deep, knee high, and down the middle. I pulled the trigger. As long as I live, I'll never forget the feeling that went through the bat and into my hands and up my arms to my brain. I'd caught the ball squarely and ripped a hard grounder up the middle and into center field. I had a hit, and it had come off a fastball. As I rounded first base, I took a deep breath. When I exhaled, a great calm came over me. For the first time, I really knew, I could hit Babe Ruth pitching. There was no time to celebrate, though. I had to get my head back in the game. Harley Jasper nubbed a 2-1 pitch toward the mound. I took off and slid hard into second. But there was no play on me. The pitcher had taken the sure out at first. That brought Jimmy up in a perfect situation to get us both off to a great start. A hit would give me my first run scored, and it would give Jimmy his first RBI, all in the first inning of the first game. As Jimmy took a final practice cut, his father rose out of the bleachers. "Come on, son," he shouted. "You can do it." It was an okay thing to say, but the way he said it wasn't okay. He was too loud, and the words ran together. Mr. Winter was drunk. I don't know how I knew it, but I knew it, and so did everybody in the park. Jimmy peered out at the pitcher. The first pitch was on a curve, a foot outside, the kind of pitch Jimmy never bit on. But this time he lunged at it for strike 1. "Jimmy, Jimmy, Jimmy!" his father yelled. "Look 'em over!" The next pitch was in the same place, which is smart pitching. Jimmy lunged again, which is definitely not smart hitting. "What kind of swing is that?" Mr. Winter bellowed. Jimmy stepped out, adjusted his helmet, stepped back in. The pitcher stretched, delivered a fastball a foot outside. Jimmy couldn't have hit it with a pole, but he waved at it anyway. "Strike 3. "Ha!" his father groaned, throwing his hands up. All through the game, Mr. Winter yelled advice to Jimmy, and all through the game I kept looking for a good time to tell Jimmy to play ball and forget about his father. I never found it, which shouldn't be any big surprise. When would it ever be a good time to tell a guy to forget about his father? The game settled into a pitcher's duel. San Carlos managed another run in the 5th on an error by Jimmy, a stolen base, and an RBI double. Their pitcher had us eating out of his hand. We scratched out a hit here and there, but we never had more than 1 base runner in an inning. As we came in for our last at-bat, Coach Loeffler clapped his hands. Come on, guys, we can get them. But even he didn't sound like he had much hope. Our first two guys went down on infield pops. That brought me into the plate. The pitcher got two quick strikes on me, one on a foul and the other on a lousy call by the ump. I felt like dead meat up there. The parents in the bleachers started packing up to go home. But I lucked out. I don't know whether their pitcher was tiring or whether he was trying to be too tricky, but he threw me a fat changeup. I couldn't have ordered an easier pitch to hit. I ripped a line shot into the gap in left center and took second base standing up. That brought the guys on the bench back to life, and it made the parents sit down again. I bobbed around out at second, trying to rattle the pitcher. He stretched, looked back at me, wheeled, and fired to Jasper. He overthrew it, and the ball sailed inside, grazing Jasper on the arm. Harley rubbed it off and trotted down to first. 2 on, 2 out, with Jimmy at plate. Their pitcher looked sick to his stomach, and everything had happened so quickly, no reliever was ready. The pitcher stretched. I bluffed off second. He kind of flinched, and then he started to throw home, but stopped. "Balk!" the umpire yelled, and he motioned Jasper and me to move up a base. Now we were really cooking. A game that looked lost was coming back to us. A single from Jimmy would tie it. "Just a little bingo," I shouted. "That's all we need." At that moment, I spotted Mr. Winter directly behind home plate. His fingers were curled against the cyclone fence, and he had his mouth right up against it. "Come on, son," he boomed. "Show them what you're really made of." The ump called time, took off his mask. "Back up a couple steps, buddy," he said. "I'll stand where I want to," Mr. Winter barked. "You're not going to stand there, pal. A foul ball could break your fingers." "Move back, Dad," Jimmy said. "Please." Everybody in the park watched Jimmy's father let go of the fence and back up a couple steps. "Is this okay?" he snarled. The ump didn't answer. "Play ball," he called as he pulled his mask back down. With his father hovering behind him, Jimmy struck out on 3 pitches. I don't think he came within a foot of the ball on any of them. As Jimmy and I were packing up our gear after the game, Mr. Winter came to the bench, the woman right with him. "I'll give you a ride home, son." Jimmy stuffed his cleats into his bag. "That's okay, Dad. I'll catch a ride with Seth." Mr. Winter's eyes went mean. I was afraid he'd do something crazy, maybe grab for Jimmy or something, but his girlfriend tugged his arm. In the end, the two of them walked away. At the next practice, Jimmy's fielding stunk, and so did his hitting. Loeffler yelled at him, but Jimmy shrugged instead of getting fired up. "I have to quit the team," Jimmy told me afterward as we were walking home. "My mom is going to rent out the house. We're moving in with my grandparents in Belmont." My chest tightened. I couldn't imagine not seeing Jimmy anymore. "You can't move," I said at last. "We have to. You saw my father. He's running around with his new girlfriend. My mother can't stand it, and neither can I." "But what good is moving to Belmont? You still might see him." He sighed. "You might as well know everything. 2 nights ago, my father pounded on the door at midnight. When my mother opened it a crack, he shoved his way in. He screamed that she had a guy with her and that he was going to kill them both. He tore through the house, looking in all the rooms, even in the closets. Then he grabbed her and started shaking her. She has bruises on both her arms." We'd reached the corner where he turned off. We both knew that our days of hanging around together were over, and neither of us wanted them to end. Finally, Jimmy spoke. "Well, there's one good thing. Next year I'll be able to play on Belmont Braves. They've won the Babe Ruth title 4 straight years, you know." I shook my head. No, I didn't know. "Well, they have," Jimmy said. He paused. "Look, Seth, I've really got to go. There's lots of packing to do. Maybe I'll see you around," I said. "Yeah, maybe," he answered. If we'd been girls, we would have exchanged addresses. Belmont is only 8 miles from Redwood City. We could have figured out some way to meet, but we didn't. I watched him head up his block. Then I headed home.